This week, I don't know if you've seen it. You probably have. Jillian Michaels was on CNN, and she was on a panel with Abby Phillips, I believe is her name. And she said, she towed that line earlier this week where Trump said slavery wasn't that bad or something along those lines. And she said, basically, I'm going to paraphrase. What she said was, I'm tired of white people being blamed for slavery. Only 2% of white people in North America, in United States, owned slaves at the time of the Civil War. Only 2%. So how do you blame everybody? And she, that's what it really sort of boiled down to for her was white people bad. I'm tired of white people bad. I'm tired of everybody saying that white people were bad. She was talking about walking through these museums and seeing displays where it basically boils down to these people suffered because white people bad. I'm not going to argue her points. I've seen a few different takes on it from some historians, and the idea that only 2% of Americans owned slaves, white Americans owned slaves, it's factual, but it's not how you would look at that math. The math is actually much more complicated than that, because there were only certain people allowed to own slaves, right? The head of household. So what it comes down to is only 2% of the head of households own slaves, which actually is a whole big number, much bigger number of people. You think about the fact that slavery was outlawed in roughly half the states. So it's 2% of the head of households in half the states. Anyhow, all this, really, the thing that got me about this, and I think the thing that I want to touch on with you, is as I'm watching her do her thing, and then I'm watching Abby Phillips call her out for it, and her trying to double down, and her trying to, don't say that I said that, I didn't. And why are you so upset? You walk into a museum, and you see something that talks about the suffering of a people, and it says they suffered at the hands of white Europeans. Why are you so upset? Why does that bother you so much? I mean, if I walk into the Museum of Natural History here in Halifax, and we go in to look at the Mi'kmaq display, there's this really amazing exhibit where there's 10 different stations, and you can pick up a phone, wired phone. You can pick up a phone and you can listen to the story of what's being presented to you. And sometimes it's maps, sometimes it's documents, sometimes it's blankets, sometimes it's photos of different moments, historical moments, and you're listening the whole time. And there's lots of talk about how the English did this and how the English did that, and how this person, this particular English general, or this particular English governor, or this particular English person of power called for this or called for that or asked for this. And, there's some horrible stuff. Here in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, there is some horrible things that were done to the Mi'kmaq. One of the things that pops into my brain immediately was a bounty on scalps. Governor Cornwallis wanted the Mi'kmaq gone, and so he placed a bounty on scalps. He's the only one that did it, right? So if I were coming back to her thing, well, then why should all white people be blamed? Because we didn't stop him. I'm Irish and Scottish. There's very little of my lineage comes directly from England, but it was people like me. Right? It was people like me that did it. I can accept that. I can accept that my ancestors were probably on the wrong side of history for a few things. We just talked about how there were so many here in Canada who were on the side of Yahtzee Germany. They loved what the Yahtzees stood for. Loved it. Again, went to the meetings, went to the rallies, said the chants, cheered and sang along with all the other Yahtsees. They were on the wrong side of history. My ancestors, I have ancestors that would have been on the wrong side of history, especially when it comes to what could have come from slavery here in Canada, though my ancestors didn't get here until after slavery was abolished, but nonetheless, it might have been over in England, it might have been over in Ireland or Scotland. It may have been that my ancestors were on the wrong side of history when it came to the cruelty directed at the Indigenous people here in Nova Scotia. It's entirely possible. Now, does that mean I'm bad? No. Does it mean I'm to blame? Me, Ed? No. Does it mean that Jillian Michaels was to blame for the American slave trade? No. No, absolutely not. But it was white Europeans. It was white Europeans who were trading African lives into slavery. African men and women and children into slavery. It was white Europeans. There's no way around that. And even though only 2% might have owned a slave, the entire countries, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, directly profited from the slave trade. I'm an Anglican priest. Does that make me bad because of that? No. For me, when I think of these kinds of exhibits, and they do break my heart, I think about the stuff that I read about our residential schools here in Canada, and it shatters me. I can think about how in the 1930s, a boat carrying Jewish refugees trying to escape Yahtzee Germany arrived here in Halifax, and we refused them. And we sent them back. We sent them back to tyranny. We didn't do it because we were full. We did it because they were Jewish. I see these stories, and they are heartbreaking. They don't make me feel guilty. And they don't make me feel less of myself. My ego isn't hit. My self-esteem isn't hit. My identity isn't hit. I see these kinds of exhibits as a gift, because people that looked like me did some really nasty, horrible, barbaric, horrendous things. And I, by seeing these displays, I can commit myself to never making those mistakes again. I will never follow them. I will do everything I can to make sure that my children, my community, my family never follow in their footsteps. And that's the gift of history. And not for nothing. And it's difficult to speak for other cultures, but if I think about Canadians and the beauty that is Canada, and I think about the new people we have thousands and thousands and thousands of migrants coming into Nova Scotia, coming into Halifax. And they go into those museums and they see these stories and they become acquainted with these stories. Well, maybe the gift continues to them as well. And they say to themselves, wow, those people did some really horrible things. Let's make sure we never do that. Maybe even the Mi'kmaq who see and are taught the stories of how white Europeans harm them. Maybe even African Americans who are taught the stories of how white Europeans harm them. They can say to themselves, we were oppressed. We promised never to be the oppressor. I mean, the stories of our history told from that perspective, told from the painful perspective of those who suffered. It matters. It is intensely important for us to grasp that people have been harmed. And I would say not only by others of a different skin color, but by the values and the ideals of those people, of those societies. Those exhibits aren't there to teach the world that white people are bad. They're there to remind us of the evil that has been perpetrated upon others and why that evil has been perpetrated upon others, and what the reward was for perpetrating that evil upon others, and what people were trying to get out of it, the benefits of it, so that we never make those mistakes again. But if you think that those exhibits and these museums and these stories and the sharing of this history is about demonizing one particular race, like Jillian Michaels says, that white people are bad. I think my question to those people would be, why are you so insecure about who you are? Why are you so insecure about who you are that you are willing to connect yourself emotionally to those people that did those horrible things? Why do you believe that's a reflection upon you? Why do you believe that those stories are actually demonizing you? You're more than the color of your skin, aren't you? You're more than your ancestry. You're more than your great-grandparents, your great-great-great-grandparents. You got to be more than that, don't you? These exhibits aren't there to shame you. They're not there to make you feel guilty. They're not there to destroy your self-esteem. They're not there to insult your heritage. They're there to remind us of where we come from. They're there to remind us of who we can be when we're not careful. They're there to remind us of who we can be when we allow things like greed and gluttony and sloth. When we allow things like fear and violence, when we allow ideologies like supremacy, like we are somehow above and beyond others. They're there to remind us how these kinds of ideations, these kinds of ideals and values, these kinds of desires can lead us into doing some of the most barbaric things, some of the most inhumane things. They're there to remind us that we are indeed, we are willing to give up our humanity, and possibly our soul, for the sake of money, for the sake of power, for the sake of things in this world that will one day be stripped from us anyway. They're a gift. They are an absolute gift if you're willing to receive it. Amen.